Oh, what is up, AP people? We have a quick review video on the Vietnam War today. I'm going to only focus on things that will be on your APUSH exam. There's a lot of stuff that happens during the Vietnam War, but we're going to focus on things that are most often tested for your APUSH exam. So let's get going. All right, so key ideas that happened before the Vietnam War. Well, you have to understand the idea of containment, which is the U.S. policy of keeping communism from spreading. Now, I want you to think of a water bottle here without a cap on, and all the water inside this water bottle is communism. If the water bottle were to be flipped upside down, communism would spread and leak all over. So the U.S. wants to contain that or put a little cap on top of the bottle. And this is the idea of George Kennan, a top U.S. diplomat post World War II. His idea of containment gets adopted through things such as the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan as well. Okay, 1954, we have Dien Bien Phu, which is a city. It falls, and that's also part of Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire. Dien Bien Phu falls, rock around the clock. Einstein, James Dean, Brooklyn's got a winning team. You must check that song out. It's very good if you don't know it. So France withdrew from what was called French Indochina or Vietnam. So the U.S. is going to increase its presence in Vietnam. It's essentially going to replace France. A driving force behind the Vietnam War is something called the domino theory, and it's this idea that if Vietnam became communist, surrounding countries will also become communist. And here's a good cartoon that illustrates this. If all these countries are dominoes and Vietnam starts here and is pushed over by a Viet Cong or communist, then Laos, then Cambodia, Thailand, Burma, India, and Bangladesh could also fall victim to communism, and this U.S. soldier here wants to stop that from happening. The North Vietnamese are communist and the South Vietnamese are non-communist. Just like the Korean War, the North is going to be communist, the South is going to be non-communist. Hawks is a term for people in the United States that support the war, and doves is a term for people in the United States that were against the war. In 1964, we have something called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, and this is probably the most important concept AP wants you to know from the Vietnam War. So here's the background info. The U.S. alleged that American ships were attacked by North Vietnam, and specifically North Vietnam torpedoes attacked ships. Here is Robert McNamara, who is the Defense Secretary of the United States, and he's pointing out the Gulf of Tonkin, which is right here. Vietnam is right next to it. And there are different accounts of what happened. Everybody can pretty much agree that the U.S. exaggerated what really happened. So what does the resolution do? Well, it's passed by Congress, and it allowed President Johnson to do anything necessary to prevent future attacks and to increase involvement as he saw fit in the U.S. military in Vietnam. And the impact of the resolution, it increases the power of the president drastically. Essentially, it's been, you'll hear this term a lot, that it gives President Johnson a blank check. And I'm really kind of proud of this because I found this blank check online. I added this stuff in. Hope you admire that. It allows the president to do things that he normally wouldn't have been able to before when it comes to war. So this also kind of limits the idea of separation of powers. Some things that Congress can only do when it comes to war are now given to the president. Johnson escalates U.S. involvement in Vietnam. So after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the U.S. involvement in Vietnam increases drastically. Guys, I can't stress enough, please know the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. In January of 1968, there's something called the Tet Offensive, and this is the North Vietnamese launched a surprise attack on the Vietnamese New Year on South Vietnam. And this is the beginning of the end for public opinion turning on the Vietnam War, and we start to see protests increasing more. Basically, President Johnson was promising people that the war would end soon and the U.S. was making progress, and this shows that it is not the case whatsoever. In 1970, you must know the invasion of Cambodia. President Nixon authorized a bombing of a neighborhood country, Cambodia, right here on this map. And he did it because he said that the North Vietnamese were getting aid from Cambodia. You must know the invasion of Cambodia. This leads directly to the Kent State protests. Lots of colleges, including Kent State, across the country are protesting about the bombings in Cambodia. Why is the U.S. bombing Cambodia, they would ask, when the Vietnam War is strictly going on in Vietnam? So there are many students that protest at Kent State over the Cambodia bombings. The National Guard is called in, and 4 students are killed, and over a dozen are injured as well. That cannot stress enough, guys. I've seen questions on released AP exams that what was a result of the Cambodia bombings, or why did the Kent State massacre occur, something along those lines. It is a result, the Kent State massacre happens because of the Cambodia bombings. Students were protesting Cambodia bombings. Okay, Nixon we're going to talk about in his policy called Vietnamization. And this was his plan to gradually withdraw U.S. troops from Vietnam or gradually end the war in Vietnam and to replace U.S. soldiers with trained South Vietnamese troops. In 1968, he campaigned here with one of his close advisors who goes on to be a Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. He campaigned using the slogan "Peace with Honor," that he will achieve peace with honor to the U.S. He will not dishonor the United States when they end Vietnam. In 1973, Congress has finally had enough of the war in Vietnam and the president's powers that they passed the War Powers Act, which overturned the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. It essentially overturned it. It restricted things that the president could do when it comes to wars, and the president must notify Congress before taking action. So this kind of reinstates the balance of power between Congress and the president that was given up during the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Please know the War Powers Act overturns the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Okay, some effects of the war. Well, during LBJ's presidency, which was until January 20th of 1969, money that could have been used on the Great Society, his plan of the Great Society, went to the Vietnam War instead. And here is a political cartoon from a past AP DBQ. And you see there are two President Johnsons here. One is trying to climb this mountain, and he is labeled the Great Society, and the other one is trying to pull him off the mountain, and that's called foreign policy. So the gist of this cartoon is that the money that could have gone to the Great Society to improve the country ended up going to Vietnam in the foreign policy, and it really took away from the Great Society. Johnson, as a result of the Vietnam War, does not run for re-election in 1968, and that's when Nixon wins. The economy in the late 60s and 1970s, we will see huge inflation, very high inflation, and the domestic impact, citizens absolutely distrust the government. So there is going to be a huge breach of trust between the federal government and citizens. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope that helps clear up some things on the Vietnam War. If you have not already, please subscribe to my channel, help spread the word. And if you get a moment, check out Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire" video as well. And in the background is a very famous picture taken from the Vietnam War. If you have any questions, comments, ideas for videos, anything, please leave them in the comments below. I really appreciate you guys watching. Have a good day.